On my 65th birthday, I sat alone, staring at a cake I baked myself, realizing no one remembered. The vanilla bean frosting, usually a scent of celebration, felt cloying in the suffocating silence of my own kitchen. A single, unlit candle stood in the center, a waxy little soldier awaiting orders that would never come. The clock on the wall, a wedding gift from a lifetime ago, ticked with an aggressive loudness, each second a tiny hammer striking the anvil of my solitude. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then 4. Then 5. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, mournful shadows across the floor, and still, the phone remained silent. The doorbell, mute surrounding me on the walls and perched on every available surface were the smiling faces of my family. There was David, my eldest, in his graduation photo, cap askew, a triumphant grin on his face. I remembered staying up for 3 nights straight to type his final thesis because his laptop had crashed. He'd barely said thank you, just grabbed the neatly bound pages and run out the door. There was Sarah, my daughter, on her wedding day, a vision in white. I had spent 6 months hand-sewing the lace appliqué onto her veil, my fingers raw and pricked, because the one she wanted was impossibly expensive, and she knew my hands were clever. The photos were a gallery of their triumphs, their milestones, their happiness. My role in each of those moments was invisible, the silent scaffolding that was dismantled and forgotten once the structure was complete. I had baked this cake out of habit, out of a stubborn, foolish hope. Every year, I made the cake. For their birthdays, for holidays, for anniversaries. It was my thing. Mom's vanilla bean cake, they'd say, their mouths full. It's the best. They loved the cake. They just forgot the reason for it today. I had woken up that morning with a familiar flutter of anticipation, a feeling that had grown weaker with each passing year but had never been fully extinguished. I'd tidied the house, dusted the already clean furniture, and laid out the special china plates with the little pink roses around the rim. I'd even bought myself a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite, and placed them in a vase on the table. A celebration for one. As the hours crawled by, the flutter of anticipation soured into a knot of dread in my stomach. I called no one. I refused to be the woman who had to remind her own children of her existence. My pride, it seemed, was the only thing I had left that was entirely my own. The cake sat before me, a perfect, frosted monument to my own foolishness. The silence in the house was no longer just an absence of sound, it was a presence. It was heavy, like a wool blanket soaked in water. It pressed down on me, filling my ears, making it hard to breathe. I thought about the sheer volume of my life that had been dedicated to them. The thousands of meals cooked, the tens of thousands of laundry loads folded, the fevers soothed, the heartbreaks mended, the checks written to cover an unexpected bill or a down payment. I was the family's eternal safety net, the ever-present foundation. But what happens when the foundation realizes it's been built upon and then completely forgotten? It cracks. With a hand that felt strangely disconnected from my body, I reached out, scooped a large glob of frosting onto my finger, and brought it to my lips. It was sweet, creamy, and perfect. A tear, hot and unexpected, escaped my eye and traced a salty path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of rage, a quiet, cold rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for years, a dormant volcano that had just been woken by the profound, deafening silence of a forgotten birthday. That cake, that beautiful, uneaten cake, wasn't a symbol of their forgetfulness. It was a symbol of my liberation. It was the last thing I would ever do for them out of blind, unreciprocated obligation. The ticking clock no longer sounded like a hammer. It sounded like a countdown. And as I sat there, alone in the twilight, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life as they knew it was over. The May they thought they knew, the one who lived in the background of their photographs, had just walked out of the frame. My life had been a long, unbroken string of yes. It wasn't a conscious choice, not at first. It was more like a current I was swept into, the gentle but insistent pull of expectation that begins for so many women of my generation the moment we are born. Yes, I'll help. Yes, I'll watch the kids. Yes, I can reschedule. Yes, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. Yes. 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 A word of 4 letters that had slowly, imperceptibly, erased the word of 2 letters, me. I remember when I was a young woman, before I married Frank, I had a dream of being a botanist. I loved the quiet, ordered world of plants, the secret language of leaves and petals. I had a scholarship to a good university, a small room filled with textbooks and pressed flowers. My world was full of Latin names and the earthy smell of potting soil. Then I met Frank. He was charming, ambitious, and saw in me not a budding scientist, but a future wife, the steady hand that would manage his home while he built his career. The choice was never presented as your dream or our life. It was a slow erosion. We'll need to move for my job, May. Yes. It's just for a few years, until I'm established. Yes. With the baby coming, you can't possibly be thinking of going back to school. A tired, postpartum yes. The textbooks were packed away, then lost in a move. The pressed flowers crumbled to dust. My dream became a quiet hobby, a few pots of geraniums on the porch, a silent testament to a life not lived. Frank wasn't a cruel man, just a product of his time. He believed his role was to provide, and mine was to nurture. And I was good at it. When David was born, I poured all my forgotten ambitions into him. I was the mother who never missed a school play, who baked 3 dozen cupcakes at a moment's notice, who knew the names of all his friends. When he struggled with math, I bought a textbook and retaught myself algebra so I could help him. He passed, and I was filled with a vicarious pride. My success was measured by his. Then came Sarah, my whirlwind of a daughter. She was all emotion and drama, a tiny artist who saw the world in vibrant, chaotic colors. Her needs were different, more consuming. She required a constant audience, an endless well of emotional support. I was the keeper of her secrets, the mender of her broken hearts, the one who told her she was brilliant when the world told her she was too much. I championed her art, framing her childhood drawings as if they were masterpieces, convincing Frank to pay for expensive art camps she'd lose interest in after a week. I remember one summer she decided she wanted to be a fashion designer. She needed a portfolio for an application, and she needed it in 2 weeks. For 14 days, I became her assistant, her seamstress, her Sherpa. I drove all over the state to find the right fabrics, stayed up until 3 in the morning pinning and sewing, my body aching with a fatigue so deep it felt like it was in my bones. She got into the program. 6 months later, she decided she wanted to be a photographer instead. The sewing machine went back into the closet. I never once said, "What about my time? What about my energy?" I just said yes. Even after Frank passed away from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, the dynamic didn't change. If anything, it intensified. I was no longer just the mother, I was the matriarch, the hub of the family wheel. The house Frank and I had built, the house that was now mine, became their free hotel, their emergency daycare, their storage unit. "Mom, can you watch little Timmy on Saturday? We have a wedding." "Yes. Mom, we're renovating the kitchen, can we store all our old cabinets in your garage for a few months?" "Yes." The few months turned into 3 years. My car, a modest sedan, was permanently parked on the street because my garage was a mausoleum of their discarded kitchen. The financial requests started subtly. "Mom, I'm a little short for the mortgage this month, work has been slow. Could you possibly?" It was David. Of course, I said yes. I drew from the savings Frank and I had so carefully accumulated, the nest egg that was meant for my own security, for my own old age. Then it was Sarah. "May, darling," she never called me Mom when she wanted money, "this amazing photography workshop in Tuscany came up. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'll pay you back, I swear." I knew she wouldn't. I also knew if I said no, I'd be the cruel, unsupportive mother who is crushing her daughter's artistic soul. So I said yes. I sold some of the stocks Frank had left me. I told myself it was an investment in her happiness. But looking back now, from the vantage point of my silent kitchen and my forgotten birthday, I see it wasn't an investment. It was a tax. A tax on being a mother, on being a woman, on being the one who was always expected to give. Each yes was a small piece of myself I handed over, until there was barely anything left. I was a house that had been stripped for parts. The wiring was frayed, the foundation was groaning, but the facade was still standing, so no one bothered to look inside. They saw the mom they had created, the one who existed solely for their comfort and convenience. They couldn't see May. To be fair, I had forgotten her, too. I had spent a lifetime making myself smaller so they could become bigger. I had smoothed their paths, absorbed their burdens, and celebrated their victories as if they were my own. I had given them my time, my money, my dreams, and my energy, asking for nothing in return. And in the end, that is exactly what I got. Nothing. Not a call. Not a card. Not a simple happy birthday. The string of yeses had led me here, to this quiet room, with this uneaten cake. And as the evening deepened into night, a new word began to form on my lips. A word I hadn't used for myself in a very, very long time. It felt foreign, sharp, and powerful. The word was no. The revelation, when it came, was not a thunderclap but a quiet, insidious whisper. It happened a week after my birthday. A week of stilted, awkward phone calls from the children. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. It completely slipped my mind. Things have been insane at work," David had said, his voice slick with a practiced, hollow apology. Sarah's was even worse. "May, sweetie, I feel just awful." Little Timmy had that stomach bug and my head was just a sieve. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew that my 65th birthday was less important than a deadline or a toddler's tummy ache. I accepted their apologies with a cool politeness that seemed to unnerve them. The dynamic had already shifted. The warm, ever-welcoming well had run dry, and they could sense the change in temperature. The incident occurred on a Tuesday. Sarah had called, her voice bright and breezy. "Hey. I'm going to pop by with Timmy in a bit. David's meeting me there. We wanted to take you out for a belated birthday lunch. Our treat." It was a transparent, guilt-driven gesture, but I agreed. I needed to see them. I needed to look them in the eye and see if they saw me any differently. I was in the hallway, putting on the sensible walking shoes I always wore, when they arrived. Sarah used her key, a key I now regretted her having, and they walked in, their voices preceding them. They hadn't seen me yet. I stood just out of sight, in the shadows of the hall that led to the bedrooms. A silent observer in my own home. "Is she ready?" David asked, his voice low and impatient. He was always impatient. "I just got here," Sarah replied, her tone conspiratorial. "God, this place smells like old lady. You know? Like potpourri and regret." A small, sharp pain, like a shard of glass, lodged itself in my chest. Potpourri and regret. Is that what my home, my life, smelled like to them? "Well, let's get this over with," David sighed. He was treating this belated birthday lunch like a chore, a box to be ticked on his to-do list. "Have you talked to the people at Silver Creek?" Silver Creek. I knew that name. It was the new assisted living facility that had been built on the edge of town. They called it a facility, but everyone knew it was a home. A place you went to wait. My blood ran cold. I pressed myself flatter against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I did," Sarah said. "It's nice. Really nice. It's more like a resort," they said. "They have a pool, and art classes, and a dining hall. She'd be comfortable there. And safe." Safe. The word was a weapon. They were framing this as a kindness, a concern for my well-being. "And the big one? Does her insurance cover it?" David asked. "The practical one. The one who always thought about the bottom line." "Most of it. We'd have to supplement a bit. But if we sell this house," Sarah's voice dropped even lower, as if the walls themselves were listening, And they were, that would more than cover it. For years. And honestly, Dave, it would be a load off my mind. I'm always worried about her being here alone. What if she falls? What if she leaves the stove on? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They worried, but not enough to call on my birthday. They worried, but not enough to visit without a self-serving agenda. Their worry was about their own convenience, their own peace of mind. They weren't trying to protect me, they were trying to contain me. To put me somewhere neat and tidy, where I would be someone else's responsibility. And let's be honest, David added, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that stole my breath, she's getting a little forgetful. That whole birthday thing. It's probably for the best. We can't be expected to be her keepers. We have our own lives, our own kids. The shard of glass in my chest twisted. Forgetful? I hadn't forgotten my birthday. They had. They were rewriting the narrative of their own neglect, recasting it as my decline. It was a betrayal so profound, so complete, that it almost didn't feel real. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above the scene, watching a play about a cruel family and a foolish old woman. Okay, Sarah said, her voice turning bright and performative again. Let's go get her. Smile. We're the loving, concerned children today. I heard their footsteps approaching the hallway. I had a choice. I could step out, confront them, let the rage and the hurt spill out in a torrent of ugly, truthful words. Or I could remain here, in the shadows, and let them believe I hadn't heard. I chose the shadows. When they found me a moment later, I forced a placid smile onto my face. There you are, I said, my voice miraculously steady. I was just getting my shoes. I'm so looking forward to this. As I walked out of my front door, between my two children who were currently plotting to dispose of me, the world looked different. The colors were sharper, the air was clearer. The polite, agreeable May they knew had died in that hallway. In her place stood a woman they had not yet met. A woman who now understood that she was not just an unseen support, but an unseen burden. And a burden, once it realizes it is a burden, has a funny way of becoming incredibly, powerfully light. They thought they were planning my future. They had no idea I was about to detonate theirs. The drive to the restaurant was a masterclass in surrealism. Sarah chattered brightly from the passenger seat about Timmy's latest preschool exploits, while David drove, occasionally grunting in what was meant to be a display of avuncular interest. They were performing their roles as good children, and I was performing mine as sweet, slightly dotty mother. It was a hideous, silent pantomime. I smiled, I nodded, I asked the appropriate questions, but inside, a revolution was taking place. The words I had overheard echoed in my mind, a toxic, repeating loop, potpourri and regret. Sell this house. A load off my mind. She's getting forgetful. Each word was a stone, and I was methodically, carefully, building a wall with them inside my own head. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant take, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a cold, clarifying anger. It was the kind of anger that doesn't scream, it focuses. For 65 years, I had defined myself by their needs. My identity was a reflection in their eyes: mother, caregiver, supporter, bank. Now, for the first time, I was seeing myself through my own eyes, and the picture was devastating. I saw a woman who had allowed her own life to become a footnote in someone else's story. We sat at a too-bright table in a chain restaurant that smelled of stale beer and fried food. They had chosen it, of course. It was halfway between their two houses, convenient for them. They handed me a menu with print so small I had to fish my reading glasses out of my purse. The salmon is good here, Mom, David said, not looking up from his phone. Healthy. He was already managing my life, starting with my lunch order. I think I'll have the cheeseburger, I said, my voice clear and firm. With extra fries. Both of them looked up, surprised. I was a salad eater, a sensible chicken breast orderer. A cheeseburger was an act of rebellion. It was a small thing, but it was a start. Are you sure, May? Sarah asked, a little wrinkle of concern between her brows. That's a lot of sodium. I'm 65, dear, I said, giving her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I think I can handle a little sodium. The conversation during the meal was a minefield of their subtle probing. Have you thought about what you want to do, long term? David asked, swirling the ice in his water. Do you ever feel lonely in that big house all by yourself? Sarah chimed in, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. This was it. The opening salvo. They were laying the groundwork for the Silver Creek conversation. The old May would have answered with vulnerability. She would have admitted to the loneliness, confessed her fears about the future, and walked right into the trap they had set. But the old May was gone. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my cheeseburger. I chewed, swallowed, and then wiped my mouth with my napkin. I looked at David, then at Sarah. It's funny you should ask, I began, my tone even and thoughtful. I have been doing a lot of thinking lately. Especially this past week. They leaned in, their faces alight with anticipation. They thought I was about to make their jobs easy. I've realized, I continued, that for my entire adult life, I've said yes to everything. I said yes to moving for your father's career, yes to putting my own plans on hold, yes to raising you two, yes to every request for my time, my energy, and my money. It was a life of yes. Their smiles faltered. This was not the script they had prepared for. And I've come to a decision, I said, placing my hands flat on the table. My 60s are going to be my decade of no. It's a new chapter. The chapter of May. David let out a short, nervous laugh. What does that mean, Mom? You're going to become a hermit? No, David, I replied, my gaze steady. It means my time is now my own. My home is my own. My money is my own. The bank of Mom, I said, looking from his face to Sarah's, is officially and permanently closed. Sarah's face paled. May, that's not. You sound angry. We're just trying to help. No, dear. You're trying to manage, I corrected her gently. There's a difference. You want to sell my house, the house your father and I built, and put me in a home so you don't have to worry. You're not worried about me. You're worried about you. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Their masks had been ripped away. David's face was a mixture of shock and fury. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. Who told you that? David finally stammered, his voice low and dangerous. You did, I said simply. About an hour ago. In my hallway. You thought I was in the back of the house, but I was just putting on my shoes. The walls in that old house are thinner than you think. The color drained from Sarah's face. She put a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. David just stared at me, his jaw clenched. He had been caught, and he knew it. Mom, Sarah began, her voice trembling. I held up a hand. There's nothing to say. You said it all. Potpourri and regret. A load off my mind. You have no idea what a load has been lifted from my mind today. You've given me a gift far more valuable than a birthday lunch. You've given me clarity. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the table. That should cover the burger, I said, standing up. Thank you for the belated celebration. It's been more illuminating than you can possibly imagine. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I didn't wait to see their reactions. I didn't care. The anger that had been simmering was now a cool, calm certainty. I was no longer a victim of their neglect. I was the architect of my own liberation. The inner dialogue that had been a cacophony of hurt and resentment had resolved into a single, powerful chord of self-awareness. I was not a burden. I was not an obligation. I was May. And for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to see what she was going to do next. The first thing I did when I got home from that disastrous lunch was change the locks. It was a symbolic act, but a deeply satisfying one. I found a 24-hour locksmith online, and an hour later, a young man with kind eyes was drilling out the old cylinders. As I paid him, he handed me a small cardboard box containing the old locks and 3 new, shiny keys. I held their sharp, clean edges in my palm. They felt like sovereignty. That evening, the phone calls began. First David, his voice tight with a rage he was barely managing to control. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Mom? We had to get a hotel. You've locked your own daughter and grandson out of their home." "I believe you're mistaken, David," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I have locked you out of my home. Sarah has a home. You have a home. This one is mine." "This is insane. You're not well. Sarah is beside herself. You've completely overreacted to a private conversation you weren't supposed to hear." "Whether I was supposed to hear it or not doesn't change the fact that you said it," I stated plainly. "And my reaction is not for you to judge. I am setting a boundary, David. This is the first one. There will be more." "A boundary?" He scoffed. "You're burning bridges, is what you're doing." "No," I corrected him. "I'm simply no longer willing to be the bridge that everyone walks over to get where they want to go. The bridge is closed for repairs." And I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from the exhilarating, terrifying thrill of it. Sarah's call came next, choked with tears. "May, how could you?" Timmy was so confused. He wanted to sleep in his grandma's house bed. "You made your own grandson cry." The emotional blackmail was as predictable as it was pathetic. The old May would have crumbled. "Sarah," I said, my voice softening slightly, but not yielding. "I love Timmy. You know I do. But my home is not a hotel, and I am not your unpaid live-in nanny. You and David need to find a permanent solution for your kitchen cabinet collection in my garage. By the way, you have 30 days to remove it, or I'm having it hauled away." "You wouldn't," she gasped. "Try me," I said, and gently ended the call. That night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly. There was no knot of anxiety in my stomach, no simmering resentment waiting to greet me in the morning. There was only a quiet, resolute peace. I was drawing a line in the sand, not just for them, but for myself. The next morning, I began the process of untangling my life from theirs in a more official capacity. I made an appointment with an estate lawyer, a woman named Ms. Albright who had been recommended by a friend. I walked into her quiet, book-lined office feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since I was that young girl dreaming of botany. "How can I help you, Mrs. Barlow?" she asked, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "I need to make some changes to my will," I said. "And I'd like to draw up a durable power of attorney and a healthcare directive." "Of course," she said, pulling out a notepad. "Who would you like to designate as your executor and your power of attorney? Your son, David, I presume?" "No," I said, the word feeling more natural with each use. "I am leaving my children a token amount each, enough to show they were not forgotten. The bulk of my estate, including my house, will be left to the National Botanical Garden. As for my power of attorney and healthcare proxy, I don't have anyone to designate just yet. But I can tell you with absolute certainty who it will not be. It will not be David Barlow, and it will not be Sarah Miller." Ms. Albright paused her writing and looked at me over the top of her glasses. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet, professional curiosity. "May I ask why?" I took a deep breath. "Because my children recently revealed that they see my assets as their inheritance and my future as their burden. They have proven themselves untrustworthy to act in my best interest. They are concerned only with their own." I expected a flicker of surprise, perhaps even pity. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "I see this more often than you would think, Mrs. Barlow," she said, her voice full of a weary understanding. "A family's true colors often come out when money and mortality are on the table. Setting these boundaries now is the wisest thing you can do. It's an act of profound self-preservation." Hearing my decision validated by this calm, intelligent woman was like a balm to my soul. I wasn't being cruel or crazy. I was being prudent. I was being sane. I walked out of her office an hour later feeling 10 feet tall. I had taken concrete, legally binding steps to protect myself and my future. My children's dismissive reactions had been the catalyst, the final push I needed to move from a place of emotional hurt to one of empowered action. Their attempt to manage me had backfired spectacularly. They had intended to put me in a box, but instead, They had handed me the key to my own cage. The cage of expectation, of obligation, of a lifetime of saying yes. I stood on the sidewalk, the city bustling around me, and I felt the sun on my face. It was the beginning of my decade of no, but for the first time, it felt like my life was a resounding yes. A yes to myself. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of unnerving quiet and newfound activity. The angry phone calls from David and the tearful ones from Sarah dwindled, replaced by a tense, resentful silence. The garage, however, was emptied within 2 weeks. A victory. But the silence they left behind created a vacuum. My life had been so full of their noise, their needs, their manufactured dramas, that their absence was both a relief and a stark reminder of how alone I was. The house felt bigger, emptier. The quiet I had craved now sometimes felt like a judgment. It was during one particularly long, quiet afternoon that I saw a flyer tucked under my windshield wiper after a trip to the grocery store. Northwood Senior Community Center, it read in cheerful block letters. It's not about getting old, it's about getting busy. Pottery, book club, bridge, yoga, guest lectures. My first instinct was to crumple it up. A senior center. It felt like a cliché, a confirmation of the very box my children had tried to put me in. An old lady with old lady hobbies. But the words of the flyer stuck with me. Getting busy. I wasn't busy. I was waiting. Waiting for what, I didn't know. The next day, driven by a mixture of boredom and a flicker of defiance, I drove to the address on the flyer. It was a low, modern brick building, much nicer than I had imagined, with large windows and well-tended flower beds full of marigolds and zinnias. I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, my hand on the door handle, wrestling with my pride. Walking through those doors felt like an admission of defeat. But then a different thought occurred to me. My children wanted to put me in a home. My walking into this center, of my own volition, for an hour or 2 a week, was not that. It was the opposite. It was a choice. It was me taking control of my own social life, not waiting for them to dictate it. I got out of the car. The inside was bright and humming with activity. There was a low murmur of conversation and laughter. A group of men were playing cards at a table, arguing good-naturedly. In a sunny corner, several women were sitting around a large table, working with lumps of clay. No one looked sad. No one looked like they were waiting to die. They looked engaged. A woman with a shock of short, stylish silver hair and bright turquoise glasses looked up from her pottery wheel as I hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "First time?" she asked, her voice warm and raspy. I nodded, feeling like a new kid at school. "Just looking." "That's how it always starts," she said with a grin, wiping her clay-covered hands on her apron. "I'm Eleanor. You're welcome to pull up a chair and watch, or you can grab a lump of clay and make a mess with us. Your choice." There was something so direct and unapologetic about her that I found myself drawn in. I took a seat at the edge of the table. "I'm May." "Nice to meet you, May," she said, before turning her attention back to the spinning clay on her wheel. "So what's your story? Did your kids kick you out, or did you escape?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Her bluntness was so shocking, so unexpected, that a laugh escaped me. A real, genuine laugh. "A little of both, I suppose," I found myself saying. Another woman at the table, a quiet lady with gentle eyes named Carol, looked up. "My son thought I'd be less of a worry if I was in a place like this full-time. He meant well." "They always mean well, don't they?" Eleanor snorted, expertly shaping the clay into a graceful bowl. "My daughter meant well when she tried to have me declared legally incompetent because I decided to sell my house and use the money to travel to see the Great Barrier Reef before it's gone for good. She thought I was being fiscally irresponsible." A third woman, Maria, chimed in. "My kids just wanted me to be a free, 24/7 babysitter. When I told them I was taking a cruise to Alaska, you'd have thought I'd announced I was joining the circus." I stared at them, my heart pounding with a feeling of dizzying recognition. Their stories were my story. The details were different, but the theme was identical, the casual entitlement of adult children, The assumption that their parents' lives should shrink to accommodate theirs, the shock and indignation when the parent finally says no. "My children forgot my 65th birthday," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. And then I overheard them planning to sell my house and put me in a home. There were no gasps of pity. There were nods. Knowing, empathetic nods. Eleanor looked at me, her gaze sharp and clear. "Good," she said simply. "Good?" I asked, confused. "Good that you heard them," she clarified. "The worst part isn't what they do, it's the not knowing. It's thinking you're going crazy, that you're being ungrateful or unreasonable. The moment you hear it out of their own mouths, everything becomes crystal clear. It's a gift. A painful one, but a gift." I felt the last of my own lingering self-doubt begin to melt away under the warmth of their shared experience. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being cruel. I was part of a silent, unacknowledged tribe of women who had given everything and were now being asked to politely disappear. But these women weren't disappearing. They were making pottery, and planning trips to Australia, and taking cruises to Alaska. "So, May," Eleanor said, gesturing with her head towards a fresh block of clay. "You going to sit there looking tragic, or are you going to get your hands dirty?" I looked at the soft, gray, malleable clay. It was a blank slate. It could be anything. A bowl, a vase, a lumpy, misshapen ashtray. It didn't matter. What mattered was the act of shaping it, of creating something with my own hands, for my own pleasure. I smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached my eyes and crinkled the corners. "I think," I said, rolling up my sleeves, "I'm going to get my hands dirty." It was more than just clay. It was my life. And I was finally ready to shape it into something of my own. The pottery class was a gateway. In the weeks that followed, the Northwood Senior Community Center became my sanctuary and my laboratory. I was experimenting with a new life, and for the first time, there were no expectations, no one to please but myself. I joined Eleanor's pottery class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My first creations were clumsy and lopsided, but the feeling of the cool, slick clay spinning beneath my hands was grounding. It was a tangible connection to the earth, a feeling I hadn't realized I missed so much. It was a distant echo of my old botanical dreams, the simple joy of working with something real and elemental. Eleanor became my unofficial guide to this new world. She was sharp, funny, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. She saw the world as it was and refused to be a victim of it. "Resentment," she told me one afternoon as we glazed our finished pots, "is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Let it go. Not for them. For you. Be angry, take action, and then move on." Her words were like a bracing tonic. On her encouragement, I signed up for a memoir writing workshop that met on Wednesdays. The first assignment was to write about a significant turning point in our lives. I sat with a blank notebook for an hour, the pen feeling heavy and foreign in my hand. What would I write about? The day Frank died? The birth of my children? Those felt like their stories, moments defined by my relationship to others. Then I thought of the cake. The uneaten birthday cake. I started to write, and the words just poured out. I described the silence of the house, the ticking of the clock, the perfect swirl of the vanilla bean frosting. I wrote about the gallery of smiling photos on the wall and the invisible woman who had made all those smiles possible. I wrote about the cold, hard rage that had finally bloomed in the place where hope used to be. I didn't hold back. I was honest, brutally so. When I finished, my hand was cramping, and the pages were filled. The next week, my turn came to read aloud. My voice shook as I began. The room was silent, filled with a dozen other people, all of them strangers, all of them carrying their own stories. As I read, I didn't dare look up. I just focused on the words on the page. When I finished, the silence stretched on for a moment. I finally lifted my head, my heart braced for judgment or pity. Instead, I saw tears in the eyes of a gentleman in the front row. A woman across from me was nodding slowly, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line of recognition. The instructor, a kind-faced woman named June, looked at me with a profound respect. "Thank you for that, May," she said, her voice soft. Thank you for your honesty. I think many of us in this room know that particular brand of silence. In that moment, I understood the power of a shared story. My specific pain, which had felt so isolating, was not mine alone. It was a universal chord, and by giving it voice, I had allowed others to feel seen. The shame I had carried, the feeling of being a fool for having given so much and been so forgotten, evaporated. I had not been foolish. I had been loving. The failure was not mine. The memoir became my project. I bought dozens of notebooks and filled them with memories, not just the painful ones, but the joyful ones too. I wrote about my childhood, about my brief, shining time as a botany student. I wrote about the smell of the university library, the thrill of identifying a rare fern. I was excavating the person I had been before I became mom. I was rediscovering May. I started taking long walks in the local arboretum, relearning the names of the trees and flowers. I bought a field guide and a sketchbook. I would sit on a bench for hours, drawing the intricate patterns of a leaf, the delicate structure of a flower petal. The world, which had felt so gray and small, confined to the walls of my house and the needs of my family, burst open into vibrant, complex detail. I was seeing again. My appearance began to change, too. I packed away the sensible, beige cardigans and muted blouses I had worn for years, the unofficial uniform of the Invisible Woman. I bought a pair of bright red sneakers. I started wearing scarves in bold colors, the turquoise of Eleanor's glasses, the crimson of a maple leaf. One day, on a whim, I had my hair cut into a chic, shorter style like Eleanor's. When I looked in the mirror, I was startled. The woman looking back at me wasn't the tired, worn-out grandmother from the family photos. Her eyes were bright. She looked interesting. She looked like she had a story to tell. And for the first time, that story was one I was writing myself. The true test of my new life came, as it often does, in the form of a crisis. About 2 months after the fateful birthday lunch, I received a frantic call from David. It was the first time he had initiated a call that wasn't about yelling at me. "Mom? It's Sarah. She's in the hospital." My heart did a familiar lurch, the old maternal panic flaring up instantly. What happened? Is she okay? She was on a ladder, trying to clean the gutters, and she fell. She broke her leg. A bad break, the doctor said. Tibia and fibula. She's going to need surgery. Oh, David. That's terrible, I said, my mind already racing. The old May would have been halfway to her car by now, her purse full of snacks, her mind full of schedules to rearrange. I'll have to take Timmy. I'll need to cook some meals to freeze for them. I should go to the hospital and sit with her. The checklist of my old life scrolled through my brain out of sheer, ingrained habit. Yeah, it's a mess, he said, his voice ragged with stress. Look, Mom, I know things have been tense. But we really need you. I have that big conference in Chicago I have to leave for tomorrow. It's a huge deal for my career, I can't miss it. And with Sarah laid up, there's no one to watch Timmy. We're in a real bind. And there it was. The ask. It wasn't Mom, your daughter is hurt, could you come be with her for support? It was Mom, we have a logistical problem, and you are the solution. My role had not changed in his eyes. I was still the family's emergency backup system. I took a deep breath, the scent of turpentine from the painting I'd been working on filling my small studio. The painting was of a sunflower, bold and unapologetically bright. I looked at it as I listened to my son's panicked voice. Mom? Are you there? I'm here, David, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm so sorry to hear about Sarah's accident. That's awful news. Please tell her I'm thinking of her and I'll call her at the hospital later to see how she is. There was a pause on his end. Okay. But what about Timmy? Can you take him? Just for the week, until I get back from Chicago. Here it was. The moment of truth. The ultimate test of my new boundaries. My heart ached for my grandson, and for my daughter, who must be in terrible pain. But this was not about them. It was about me, and the life I was trying to build. If I said yes, Every boundary I had so carefully constructed would crumble into dust. I would be right back where I started. The bridge I had closed for repairs would be trampled over before the concrete had even set. "No, David," I said. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. "What? What do you mean, no?" he finally sputtered, his voice rising in disbelief. "It's your grandson. Your daughter just broke her leg." "I know who they are, David," I said calmly. "And my answer is no. You are a capable, intelligent man. You will have to figure it out. You can postpone your trip. You can hire a temporary nanny. Your company may have emergency family leave benefits. There are options. But I am not one of them." "I don't believe this," he said, his voice thick with fury. "After everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I couldn't help the incredulous laugh that escaped my lips. "David, let's be very clear. I have spent my life doing for you. You and Sarah have spent your lives taking. The services are no longer available. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is your crisis to manage." "You've changed, Mom," he said, and he meant it as the most damning indictment he could think of. "You've become a cold, selfish person." "No, David," I said, looking at my vibrant, defiant sunflower. "I've become a person." I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were shaking, and I felt a wave of nausea. A part of me screamed that I was a terrible mother, a monstrous grandmother. The guilt was a physical thing, a heavy cloak threatening to smother me. I sat down, my head in my hands, and forced myself to breathe. What would have happened if I'd said yes? I would have taken Timmy for the week. David would have gone to his conference. Sarah would have come home from the hospital to a clean house and a stocked fridge. Their lives would have continued with minimal disruption, their crisis seamlessly absorbed by me. They would have learned nothing. And I would have learned that my own life, my art classes, my writing, my newfound peace, was secondary. That it was the first thing to be sacrificed on the altar of their convenience. The weight of my invisible labor, the thing they had never seen, was now a palpable, gaping hole in their lives. They were being forced to see it, to feel its absence. It was a harsh lesson, for them and for me. But as I sat there in my quiet studio, the smell of paint in the air, I knew I had made the right choice. It was the hardest no I had ever uttered, but it was also the most necessary. My children were finally, for the first time, having to bear the full weight of their own lives. And I was free. The fallout from what my children undoubtedly called the Timmy incident was swift and absolute. For a full month, there was nothing but a wall of punishing silence from their end. No angry calls, no tearful manipulations. Just a void. In the past, this would have destroyed me. I would have been consumed with guilt and anxiety, eventually breaking down and calling them, begging for forgiveness, promising to be better, to be the mother they wanted me to be. But something fundamental had shifted within me. I grieved the relationship I wished I had with my children, the warm, mutually supportive bond I saw other families share. But I did not grieve the loss of the role they had forced me to play. I filled the silence not with anxiety, but with life. I finished my sunflower painting and started another, a landscape of the Arboretum. I wrote 2 new chapters of my memoir. I went to coffee with Eleanor and told her the whole story. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered a toast. To the sound of a falling house of cards, she'd said, clinking her coffee cup against mine. "It's a beautiful sound, isn't it?" And she was right. Their anger, their silence, it was all proof that my actions had power. Their world had been thrown off its axis because I had simply refused to be its silent, unmoving center. The thaw began with a letter. It arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the envelope addressed in Sarah's loopy, artistic handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away, unopened. I was tired of the drama. But curiosity, and perhaps a stubborn flicker of maternal hope, got the better of me. I slid it open with my butter knife. The letter was 4 pages long. It was not the tear-stained, guilt-tripping screed I had expected. It was an apology. A real one. "May," it began, and the use of my name, not Mom or Sweetie, felt significant. I don't know where to start, so I'll just start. I'm sorry. Not just for the things you overheard, but for everything. For years. Lying in that hospital bed, and then on the couch at home, unable to do anything for myself, I had a lot of time to think. For the first time, I couldn't just call you to fix things. David was gone, and when he got back, he was so angry at you he could barely function. The house was a disaster. Timmy was watching too much TV and eating cereal for dinner. I was in pain, and I was completely, utterly overwhelmed. And all I could think was, this is what Mom did. All the time. She did it when I had the flu, when David broke his arm, when Dad was working late. She just absorbed it all. The cooking, the cleaning, the worrying, the driving. We never saw it as work. It was just what Mom did. It was invisible. Your support was like the air we breathed. We only noticed it when it was gone. And then we couldn't breathe. Hearing you say no to David, it was like a slap in the face. But after the anger wore off, I realized you were right. We're adults. Timmy is our son. My broken leg is our problem. We acted like entitled children, and you finally treated us as such. It was humiliating, and it was exactly what we deserved. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I have broken your trust in a fundamental way. But I hope, someday, we can try to build something new. A real relationship, between two adults. Not between a mother and a daughter, but between May and Sarah. I would like that very much. I miss you. Not the person who cooked my meals and bailed me out of trouble. I miss my mom. I had to read the letter twice. Tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of a profound, earth-shaking relief. She saw me. Finally, after all these years, she saw me. 2 days later, David showed up at my door. He stood on the porch, looking awkward and tired. He was holding a small potted orchid. I don't know how to write letters, he mumbled, not meeting my eye. Sarah showed me what she wrote. She was right. About all of it. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see the arrogant, impatient man he had become. I saw the little boy who used to need my help with his math homework. His eyes were full of a shame that was real and deep. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice cracking. For the way I treated you. For the way I talked about you. For taking everything for granted. There's no excuse. He held out the orchid. I know you used to like plants, he said quietly. I took the small pot from his hands. It was a fragile, beautiful thing. A peace offering. Thank you, David, I said. My voice was thick with emotion. Would you like to come in? I just made a pot of coffee. He nodded, a look of immense relief washing over his face. It wasn't a magical fix. The hurt of decades couldn't be erased by one letter and one orchid. But it was a beginning. A real one. I accepted their apologies, but I did not erase the boundaries I had set. There were no more automatic yeses. My home was still my own. My time was still my own. Our relationship was being rebuilt, but on a new foundation. A foundation of honesty. A foundation of mutual respect. They were finally learning to see me not as a function, but as a person. And I was learning to let them. The final chapter of my story, I've come to realize, isn't about conclusions. It's about continuations. Life doesn't wrap up neatly with a bow, it unfolds, season by season, each one with its own light and its own challenges. My life, which I once thought was in its final, fading autumn, had unexpectedly cycled back into a vibrant, late-blooming spring. The memoir I started in a community center workshop became a real book. I found a small, independent publisher who loved its honesty. The day the first printed copy arrived, I held it in my hands and traced my name on the cover, The Unseen Scaffolding, by May Barlow. It was a physical manifestation of my reclaimed narrative. I had taken the silence and the hurt and transformed them into something tangible, something that might help another woman sitting in a quiet kitchen feel a little less alone. We had a launch party at the Northwood Center. It wasn't a fancy affair, Just coffee and cookies and a room full of the people who had become my true community. Eleanor, Carol, Maria, and all my friends from my writing and pottery classes were there. My children were there, too. They stood in the back, not demanding the spotlight, just watching. Sarah had brought her camera, and she was quietly taking photos, not of me, but of the people mingling, of the joy in the room. David, looking uncomfortable but resolute, stood beside her. Later, he came up to me while I was signing a book for one of my neighbors. He waited patiently until I was done. "It's really something, Mom," he said, gesturing to the room. "You built this. A whole new life." There was a new tone in his voice, one I was still getting used to: respect. "I didn't build it alone," I said, looking over at Eleanor, who gave me a broad wink. "I just finally showed up for the construction." Our relationship is a work in progress. It's a careful dance on a new floor. They call before they come over. They ask about my writing, my art, my friends. They invite me to dinner, and they accept my no without argument when I have other plans. The financial requests have stopped entirely. They are managing their own lives, and while it's not always graceful, they are doing it. I see them now not as my dependents, but as the flawed, struggling, trying adults they are. I love them, but my happiness is no longer contingent on their approval or their attention. Last week was my 66th birthday. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah and David and Timmy. They were holding a cake, a lopsided, slightly burnt on the edges thing that was clearly homemade. Timmy was holding a bouquet of daisies he had obviously picked himself from someone's garden, some with very short stems. "We, tried to make your vanilla bean cake," Sarah said, laughing. "The frosting broke twice. It's a disaster, but it was made with love." "Happy birthday, Grandma," Timmy shouted, thrusting the crumpled daisies at me. Later, Eleanor and a few of my other friends from the center came over. We all sat around my kitchen table, my old friends and my new family, a motley crew brought together by choice and by change. We ate the messy, wonderful cake, and we drank coffee, and we talked and laughed. The house was filled with a new kind of sound. It wasn't the demanding noise of their old entitlement, nor was it the suffocating silence of my old loneliness. It was the warm, vibrant hum of a life fully lived. After everyone had gone, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the last crumbs of cake on the plate. The family photos are still on the wall, but they look different to me now. They are memories, not obligations. My own paintings are now hung among them, splashes of bold, defiant color. A self-portrait I did in my art class hangs opposite the kitchen table. In it, the woman's eyes are clear, and she isn't smiling a polite, accommodating smile. She's looking directly out of the frame, a small, knowing smirk on her lips. She is finally visible. She is finally valued. She is free. And her story, my story, is far from over. It is just getting started.